Every tattoo tells two stories, the visible one, and the one buried underneath. A rose may symbolize beauty, but behind it could live a story of grief. A snake might represent power, yet it could have been born from fear. Psychologists often call tattoos a narrative of self-expression, a physical extension of what the mind cannot fully articulate. For many women, tattoos emerge during transitional phases, after heartbreak, recovery, childbirth, or loss. They mark moments when life shifts from one chapter to another. Unlike words that can be rewritten, tattoos are permanent acknowledgments, a way of saying, "This happened to me. And I am still here." Ink and identity, the need to be seen. In psychology, identity is not something we are born with, it is something we build. From childhood, women are taught to fit molds, to be soft, proper, pleasing, contained. But a tattoo disrupts that script. It says, "I exist on my own terms." For many, that act of visible self-definition is revolutionary. Research in behavioral psychology shows that self-expression is directly linked to self-coherence, the harmony between inner emotion and outer presentation. When a woman feels unseen or silenced, the body becomes the canvas that speaks. The tattoo then becomes a visual voice, a symbol of psychological alignment. In other words, the ink is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It is integration. It is the psyche finding its reflection. From rebellion to revelation. Decades ago, society labeled tattooed women as outcasts, bikers, barmaids, wild souls. Today, the perception has evolved, yet the stigma lingers in subtle ways. Behind every whisper of, "she has too many tattoos," lies a deeper discomfort, the unease of seeing a woman who owns her body completely. This discomfort has psychological roots in control and projection. Historically, a woman's body has been policed, by beauty standards, religion, and gender roles. When she chooses to mark it permanently, she reclaims authorship. The tattoo becomes a psychological revolt against external authority. But rebellion is only the surface. Beneath it lies revelation. The process of tattooing, the decision, the pain, the permanence, mirrors an internal transformation. It's not about defying the world, it's about defining oneself within it. Pain as gateway. There is something sacred about enduring controlled pain, choosing it, embracing it, and transforming it. Pain, in psychological terms, triggers a profound focus. It forces presence. During tattooing, pain becomes ritual. Each sting of the needle pulls her deeper into herself, grounding her in the now. Neuroscientists note that tattooing releases endorphins, natural painkillers that bring calm, even euphoria. But beyond biology, there's symbolism. Pain here is not punishment. It is creation. Unlike emotional wounds that feel endless and invisible, tattoo pain has purpose and closure. It hurts, then heals, leaving behind something beautiful. For many women, especially those who have experienced trauma or violation, that experience is deeply reparative. It teaches a new message: my body can hurt and still belong to me. That is not rebellion. That is rebirth. The intimacy of choice. Every tattoo begins as a question: what will I carry forever? The act of choosing a design is not random, it's an intimate dialogue between conscious intention and unconscious symbolism. Psychologists often find that people are drawn to certain images or words for reasons they cannot fully explain. A butterfly might symbolize freedom, but beneath it may lie a buried memory of entrapment. A name might represent love, or loss. Tattoos, then, are unconscious messages written in metaphor. Jung called this the language of archetypes, symbols that emerge from the collective unconscious. When a woman chooses a phoenix, a moon, or a wolf, she isn't just choosing art, she's aligning with ancient feminine symbols of rebirth, intuition, and instinct. In this sense, every tattoo becomes a modern ritual, a private myth translated into skin. Beyond beauty, the psychological gaze. For centuries, a woman's body has been a canvas for other people's interpretations, painted by the eyes of men, culture, and media. But when she tattoos herself, she reverses that gaze. She becomes both the artist and the artwork. This shift carries deep psychological meaning. It disrupts the passive role of being looked at and replaces it with active self-creation. The tattooed woman is not an object of beauty, she is a curator of meaning. Yet, this act invites complexity. Some view her tattoos through fascination, others through bias. Each gaze she meets becomes a test of resilience. Can she be herself even when misunderstood? That psychological tension, between expression and judgment, defines much of the tattooed woman's inner life. She carries both the freedom of authenticity and the burden of visibility. And yet, most embrace it fully, because the truth etched on their skin feels more important than the comfort of being easily accepted. The body as journal. In therapy, there's a technique called narrative reconstruction, helping individuals rewrite painful experiences into empowering stories. Tattoos operate on a similar principle, except the story isn't told in words but in symbols. Each design represents a sentence in her ongoing autobiography. A line of script might honor someone she lost. A constellation might mark the night she decided to live again. A minimalist line across the ribs might remind her that scars can be beautiful. Unlike memory, which fades and shifts, tattoos remain constant, a visual memory she can touch. This permanence brings psychological grounding, a reminder that she has survived and that her story, once chaotic, now has visible structure. Society's shadow. Still, no matter how modern the world becomes, judgment lingers in the corners of culture. Studies in social psychology reveal that tattooed women are often stereotyped as more promiscuous, rebellious, or impulsive than their non-tattooed counterparts. These biases reflect not reality, but projection, the tendency to fear what challenges conventional order. The truth is, a woman's tattoo threatens conformity. It says, I don't need your permission to define myself. And that kind of autonomy, psychological, emotional, and aesthetic, often unsettles those who have never claimed it. Yet, this very resistance is what shapes her resilience. Through years of facing judgment, she develops a deep inner confidence, a serenity born not from approval, but from self-recognition. She learns that validation written on skin lasts far longer than validation granted by others. A new kind of feminine strength. The psychology of a woman with tattoos is the psychology of evolution, from silence to speech, from pain to power, from invisibility to presence. Each mark on her skin is a fragment of emotional archaeology, mapping where she has been and what she has conquered. Her tattoos are not just art, they are armor. Not walls to hide behind, but symbols that remind her of her worth, her choices, her survival. She wears them not to provoke, but to preserve. They are whispers of her becoming. And in a world where women's bodies are constantly told what to be, the tattooed woman answers with her own manifesto. This is mine. My story. My scars. My strength. The mirror and the message. When she looks in the mirror, she doesn't just see ink, she sees narrative continuity. The girl who was once shy, unsure, or broken has merged with the woman she is today. Her tattoos bridge those versions of herself, past, present, and future, creating a kind of psychological wholeness. To outsiders, the tattoos might look random. To her, they form a map, a constellation of meanings only she can read. And that is the beauty of it, tattoos are not meant to be understood by everyone. They are private languages written in public view. So what is the psychology of a woman with tattoos? It is the psychology of one who has chosen authenticity over approval, story over silence, art over apology. Her ink is not rebellion, it's revelation. It is not vanity, it is vulnerability turned into vision. It is not defiance, it is declaration, I am here. I have lived. And this skin tells the truth. 2. Historical and cultural roots of female tattooing. Long before tattoos became Instagram art, long before parlors glowed under neon lights and machines buzzed like cicadas, women were already marking their bodies, not for beauty, not for rebellion, but for meaning. In the beginning, tattooing was not a fashion, it was ritual. It was protection, identity, fertility, faith, and sometimes, survival. Every culture carved its symbols into the skin of women, though each did so for reasons that reflected its soul. And if we listen carefully to that history, we begin to understand the psychology that still lives within modern tattooed women today, the deep human need to belong, remember, and transcend. The ancient feminine code. Archaeological records reveal that tattooing dates back more than 5,000 years, and in many ancient societies, it was women, not men, who bore the ink. The oldest preserved human tattoos, found on the mummy of Otzi the Iceman, may belong to a man, but the earliest evidence of symbolic tattoos, those tied to culture and identity, were found on female mummies from ancient Egypt. In Thebes, a tattooed priestess named Amunet carried lines and dots along her thighs, breasts, and abdomen. For centuries, historians speculated that such markings were decorative or erotic. But later studies revealed something more profound: those tattoos aligned with childbirth and fertility, serving as talismans of protection for both mother and child. These were not marks of rebellion. They were marks of power, spiritual armor worn in flesh. The ancient Egyptian woman didn't have a voice in politics or temples, but her body was her temple. Tattooing it with sacred symbols was an act of faith, not defiance. She believed her ink carried divine energy, an invisible shield between her and chaos. Africa, the tribal language of skin. Across ancient Africa, tattoos and scarifications told stories of lineage, maturity, and spirit. In parts of Nigeria, Sudan, and Ethiopia, body markings were used to symbolize strength, motherhood, and belonging. Among the Maasai, Berber, and Fulani, women's tattoos carried coded messages about their tribe, marital status, and courage. In these cultures, tattooing was not cosmetic but communal. To be tattooed was to be recognized. To bear a specific symbol meant that you had passed through fire, a coming-of-age ritual that separated child from woman. Pain, once again, was not punishment, it was initiation. The woman who endured the sting of the needle earned not just marks, but meaning. Psychologically, these rituals created collective identity, what Carl Jung would later call the tribal self. A woman didn't need to explain who she was, her skin spoke for her. Even now, modern women tattoo for similar reasons, not to mimic tribal art, but to reclaim the right to say, "This is who I am. I define me." Asia, tattoos as spiritual maps. In Japan, the story took a different turn. For centuries, women's tattoos were hidden, a whisper beneath silk. The Ainu women of northern Japan tattooed their mouths and hands as symbols of maturity and purity. Their mouth tattoos, resembling a dark smile, marked their transition from girlhood to womanhood and served as protection from evil spirits. These markings, though painful, were sacred. They were part of a woman's spiritual duty, connecting her to her ancestors and the divine feminine. They were not meant for display, they were prayers, written in skin. Later, during the Edo period, Japanese tattooing evolved into an elaborate art form known as irizumi. But here, the symbolism shifted, tattoos became both art and resistance. Women who bore irizumi often belonged to the margins of society, performers, geishas, laborers. Their tattoos were living tapestries, koi fish for perseverance, cherry blossoms for impermanence, dragons for strength. Each image carried psychological depth, a reminder that beauty could coexist with struggle. To be tattooed was to be both visible and hidden, a contradiction that remains part of the tattooed woman's psyche even today. Polynesia, the sacred geometry of belonging. In Polynesian cultures, tattooing was a sacred science, a language of geometry, rhythm, and spirit. The very word tattoo comes from the Polynesian term tata, meaning to mark. Women in Samoa, Tonga, and Hawaii received tattoos that represented their genealogy and inner power. Unlike modern Western culture, these tattoos were not rebellious but reverent. A woman's body was seen as a divine map, and her tattoos traced the lineage of her people. To be tattooed was to belong not just to a family, but to an ancestry. During tattoo rituals, women entered trance-like states, often accompanied by chants and song. Pain became a spiritual bridge, transforming her body into a sacred vessel of endurance and grace. Psychologically, this reveals a truth that modern psychology still explores: pain, when voluntarily accepted, can become a gateway to transformation. It can change how one relates to oneself, turning suffering into sacred meaning. For the Polynesian woman, tattooing was not about how she looked, but about what she carried. Each mark was an inheritance of spirit, not rebellion, but reverence. Europe and the Western shift, from sacred to stigmatized. When tattooing reached Europe, the story changed drastically. Victorian morality, rooted in Christianity and class hierarchies, viewed the body as something to preserve in purity, not decorate with ink. Men at sea and soldiers returning from war brought tattoos home, and the practice quickly became associated with criminality, poverty, or foreignness. For women, it was even harsher. A tattooed woman was not seen as spiritual or brave, she was seen as fallen. The first tattooed European women to gain attention were circus performers in the 19th century, such as Nora Hildebrandt and Irene Woodward, who exhibited their bodies for profit. Their tattoos became both spectacle and survival, a way to earn money in a society that left them no other path. The world watched, fascinated and scandalized. And so the Western mind learned to associate tattooed women with sexuality, defiance, and deviance. But beneath that moral panic lived something more complex: envy. The tattooed woman, even when judged, possessed something the average woman didn't: control over her own image. And control, in a patriarchal world, is power. Modern evolution, from margins to mainstream. The 20th century saw a slow but unstoppable transformation. As feminism rose, so did the tattooed woman. In the 1970s and 80s, tattoo artists like Lyle Tuttle began tattooing celebrities such as Janis Joplin, whose small heart tattoo near her breast became a symbol of freedom and authenticity. By the 1990s, women were walking into tattoo shops not as curiosities but as clients, professionals, artists, mothers, students, all seeking to express themselves in permanent ink. The shift was psychological as much as social. The tattoo was no longer a mark of rebellion, it was a mark of identity. It said, "I own my story. I design my skin." Yet, the journey from stigma to acceptance did not erase the shadow of judgment. Even today, studies reveal that tattooed women are more likely to be labeled less professional, less trustworthy, or more impulsive in certain settings. The ghost of Victorian morality lingers, whispering through generations. But unlike their foremothers, modern women no longer bow to that ghost. They wear their ink like crowns, symbols of survival, sensuality, and self-definition. Cultural shifts and the female psyche. What does this long history reveal psychologically? It tells us that tattooing has always been tied to a woman's relationship with power. In ancient times, tattoos connected her to community and the divine. In colonial and modern times, they marked her as an outsider. Today, they reclaim her individuality, merging the sacred and the personal. Every generation of tattooed women carried a psychological burden and a gift. The Egyptian woman carried faith through fertility. The African woman carried identity through tribe. The Japanese woman carried art through silence. The Western woman carried rebellion through shame. The modern woman carries truth through choice. Across time, the same psychological pattern repeats: women use their bodies as canvases when their voices are constrained. When culture silences, the skin speaks. And perhaps that's the most enduring truth: the tattooed woman does not emerge from nowhere. She is the descendant of priestesses, healers, mothers, and warriors who once marked their bodies for gods, for ancestors, for survival. She continues their legacy, not with bone needles and ash, but with machines and ink. Different tools, same soul. Ink as inheritance. When a modern woman walks into a tattoo parlor, she may not know it, but she's stepping into a sacred lineage. Her act of tattooing is not just personal expression, it's ancestral remembrance. Each hum of the needle echoes the chants of her foremothers. Each drop of ink carries the same ancient message. My body is not just flesh, it is story, symbol, and spirit. That awareness gives her strength. Even if society judges, even if whispers follow her, she knows that every woman before her who bore marks, visible or invisible, paved the way for this freedom. She doesn't carry shame. She carries legacy. Thus, the psychology of a woman with tattoos cannot be understood without history. Her motives are not born in isolation, they are shaped by centuries of meaning, by the collective feminine struggle to turn silence into symbol, to reclaim the body as both message and medium. When she looks at her ink, she sees more than a design. She sees lineage. She sees power reborn. 3. The tattoo as identity and self-definition. A woman's identity is not born, it is built. Brick by brick, through experience, rejection, love, loss, and reflection, she constructs a sense of who she is and what she stands for. For some, this identity is shaped quietly, through choices, words, and relationships. For others, it is written on the skin itself. The tattooed woman doesn't just wear art, she wears her evolution. Her tattoos are coordinates, points on the map of her becoming. Each design is a version of herself, captured in color and line, suspended forever between memory and meaning. The body as biography. When psychologists talk about identity, they often refer to Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development, particularly the crisis of identity versus role confusion that defines adolescence and early adulthood. In this stage, individuals ask the timeless question, who am I? For many women, especially in societies that dictate what femininity should look like, that question is a battlefield. She is told to be soft, yet strong, expressive, yet appropriate, visible, yet modest. Her sense of self becomes fragmented, stretched between expectation and authenticity. Tattoos become a way to pull those fragments together, to create an integrated self. When she inks her body, she is writing her own biography in a language the world cannot edit. A feather might represent the moment she left home. A compass might symbolize the year she found direction after being lost. A scar covered by art might declare, this pain no longer defines me. Unlike spoken words, tattoos cannot be erased by time or doubt. They fix identity in permanence. And for a woman constantly evolving, that permanence brings both grounding and liberation. The need to be seen, and to see oneself. Human beings are wired for recognition. In social psychology, visibility is essential to identity formation. We become who we are through how others see us, and how we see ourselves reflected in their gaze. But for many women, that gaze has long been distorted, filtered through cultural ideals, beauty standards, and moral codes. A tattoo disrupts that gaze. It forces the world to look again, to see her as she chooses to appear, not as society dictates. It reclaims the power of visibility. In that sense, tattooing is not vanity, it's visibility therapy. It allows a woman to assert, this is my skin, my symbol, my statement. You can look, but I decide what it means. Psychologically, that act strengthens self-concept, the internal model we hold of ourselves. When a woman expresses her inner world outwardly, through art that she chooses and endures for, she creates alignment between her inner and outer identities. That alignment is what psychologists call self-congruence, the harmony between who we are inside and how we exist in the world. When self-congruence deepens, anxiety decreases, confidence rises, and the individual experiences a stronger sense of authentic existence. Thus, for many tattooed women, their ink is not rebellion, it's therapy made visible. Carl Rogers and the authentic self. The humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers believed that the core of psychological health lies in self-actualization, the process of becoming one's true self. He argued that people suffer not from who they are, but from who they are forced to pretend to be. Tattoos, especially for women, become acts of self-actualization. They are expressions of the authentic self that often lies buried beneath layers of conformity. When a woman chooses a tattoo, especially one that defies traditional expectations, she is saying, "I am no longer hiding behind who I'm supposed to be. I am living as who I really am." Each stroke of ink closes the distance between her inner truth and her public image. And that narrowing gap brings psychological relief, a sense of coming home to herself. This is why, even when society disapproves, many women describe feeling more confident, more alive, and more themselves after being tattooed. The ink is not decoration, it's declaration. It's her soul catching up with her skin. The multiplicity of identity. Yet, identity is not a single, fixed thing, it is layered, fluid, and often contradictory. A woman can be a mother and a rebel, a professional and an artist, a caretaker and a storm. Her tattoos often reflect these multiplicities, the paradoxes that make her whole. One tattoo might represent tenderness, another, defiance. One might honor her children, another might mark a wild chapter of youth. The coexistence of these opposites is what makes tattooing such a psychologically rich practice. It allows her to contain contradictions without apology. This mirrors Jung's concept of individuation, the process of integrating all parts of the psyche, including the shadow. The tattooed woman, consciously or unconsciously, often performs this individuation on her body. She brings her shadow, her pain, her mistakes, her desires, into light and art. She no longer hides her complexity, she wears it openly. In this way, tattooing is not just expression, it's integration. It's psychological wholeness made visible. The social mirror, self-definition versus judgment. Identity does not form in a vacuum. It is shaped through social interaction, through feedback, approval, rejection, and curiosity. When a woman with tattoos enters a room, she triggers projections. Some admire her courage. Others judge her as reckless or attention-seeking. These reactions reveal more about the observer than about her. Social psychologists call this the mirror effect, the tendency to see in others what we fear or desire in ourselves. In that sense, the tattooed woman becomes a mirror for the collective psyche. To the repressed, she represents freedom. To the conformist, she represents danger. To the insecure, she represents confidence. To the liberated, she represents kinship. And yet, within this projection, she learns something profound, that identity cannot depend on perception. Her worth is not measured by how she is seen, but by how she sees herself. This detachment from external validation is a major psychological milestone, what therapists call internal locus of control. The tattooed woman gradually shifts from living for approval to living from authenticity. Her ink is both catalyst and compass for that inner shift. The tattoo as emotional archive. Each tattoo is an emotional artifact, a frozen moment of the psyche. In therapy, clients often use journaling or art to process emotions. Tattooing functions similarly, but with permanence. It is emotional storytelling with the stakes raised. The story must be chosen carefully, because it will never fade. That very permanence brings introspection. Before getting a tattoo, many women ask, "What does this mean to me? Can I live with this forever?" That question itself is a form of self-exploration. When the needle begins, emotion transforms into endurance. Joy, grief, guilt, or pride crystallizes into line and color. Afterward, she carries the emotion not as burden but as art. Over time, these images form an emotional archive. Each tattoo tells a chapter of her story, and together they form her internal autobiography, one that cannot be erased, rewritten, or misinterpreted. The permanence of ink mirrors the permanence of growth. Even if she changes, she does not regret, she understands that the tattoo marks who she was when she needed that meaning. And that acceptance is pure psychological maturity. The search for belonging. For some women, tattoos are not about standing out, but about belonging to a community of shared experience. There are tattoo cultures, symbols, and aesthetics that carry collective significance, from the solidarity tattoos of survivors to symbols of sisterhood or